hope you're hungry. Chris McCarthy serves up a buffet of both national and South Coast topics from the week that was
and the week ahead.
Read his latest blogs on WBSM.com. Leave a comment on our Facebook page. Or join the show by calling 508-996-0500. Now, here's the host of Sunday Brunch,
Chris McCarthy.
And good morning. I'm Chris McCarthy. This is Sunday Brunch, and we are really excited to have in the studio with us live. And I appreciate him coming in live. A lot of people just call in, but he's not. Shows his dedication to this campaign. He's not phoning it in. He's come here down to Fairhaven directly. Dr. Shiva for Senate.
Hi, Chris. Great to be on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for coming down. So this is interesting. You're running for the seat currently occupied by the fake Indian, as I noticed in some of your literature, or some of the people who are supporting you are pointing out. You're a real Indian from India, and she's the fake Indian from Nebraska. What has gotten you into the race?
Well, you know, Chris, for me, it's really been about the American dream. And I feel that the American dream has been under attack. And I'm an embodiment of it. You know, I came here from India as a 7-year-old kid at a time, if you look back, when America offered incredible opportunities and still does. You know, in my opinion, it's a birth lottery to be born in America. True. And you have people like Elizabeth Warren, Bernie Sanders, what I call the not-so-obvious establishment. These people claim that they want to help people like me, people of color, poor people. But what they really want to do is they want to subjugate people. They want to keep people on a plantation model. And they really don't want to unleash what the American dream was all about, which is hard work and meritocracy. And they're taking that away. But they couch it in this larger framework as though they want to help people, when in fact what they really want to do is have a centralized command and control around them and really take away people's spirit. And our campaign, if you look at the model, it's about be the light and fight for the American dream.
What a great saying. What a great slogan. Tell us a little bit. So you came here from India at the age of 7, and then how did you get to here? Give us a little bit about your background.
So I don't know if you know, India has a caste system.
I do know that, actually.
Yeah,
explain that a little bit for people.
Yeah, so India has an interesting caste system. You know, it is not based on meritocracy. It's based on your birth. So we were born as what was called a lower caste. At one time, we were the untouchables.
Really?
Yeah, so the top of that caste system was called the priesthood, the Brahmins, and then you have the kings, and then the business people, and then the warriors. And then everyone else is basically divided into even subcastes called the lower caste. So that's how India was organized, and we were considered the lower caste, called the equivalent of the N-word in India. Mm-hmm. So this was not based on meritocracy. So the fact that my parents even made it to America was pretty significant. And these were two extremely hardworking people whose chances of coming to America under the Indian conditions was probably 1 in a trillion. Really? Yeah, so the fact that I made it to India, you know, my earliest memory was getting off the plane at JFK. We literally left India on my 7th birthday, and I had shorts on.
Happy birthday.
Snowing. Yeah, this is December 2nd, 1963. But yeah, it was a birthday to land in America in many ways. But I was always compelled to work really hard because I knew coming here was a gift. You know, my dad had already been here. So me and my mom and my sister had to wait another year. We legally immigrated, and we pursued the American dream. So it was about hard work. So I knew that I had to do extremely well and achieve because I knew what little people had elsewhere. So we settled in Paterson, New Jersey, one of the poorest cities in the United States. Certainly. Then every 2 to 3 years, my parents would move to the better public school system. They didn't really like the elite private school model, but we kept moving to the better public school system. So by that, so we went from Paterson, New Jersey to Clifton, then Parsippany and Livingston. By the time I was 14, I was one of those overachieving kids, but I wasn't just a nerd. I was also a good athlete. And I had finished calculus by the time I was 9th grade.
Which I am yet to do, to be honest with you, Dr. Shiva.
Well, you can still do it.
Thank you.
There's a lot of online programs now. Education's actually gotten easier, so no one has any lack of excuse of why, or any excuse why they should not be getting educated. Right. But so that was my journey. So by the time I was 14, here was a 14-year-old kid, I got accepted to a special program at New York University. Okay. To learn computer science. 40 students were accepted. Okay. And so I would go from Newark Penn Station to New York at 5 a.m. and I graduated top of the class. When I finished, I had a few more humanities courses left at my high school, but I started working full-time as a researcher at Rutgers Medical School in the heart of Newark. And that's where I was given this great challenge. If you remember the old inbox, outbox folders, inter-office mail system. I was given
Right.
the challenge to convert that to the electronic form, and that's what I did. Wrote 50,000 lines of code, 35 programs.
At
and
the
I
age
called
of
it email. I
at
was
the age
14.
of 14 years old.
But you got to understand, this came out in Newark, New Jersey. I had a loving family who supported me, public school teachers who changed the rules so this kid could go work. Now, the public school system constrains kids from doing anything. They think they know better. The Department of Education, as though it knows better. And then out of that is where email came. Email was not invented by the military. It was invented by a 14-year-old kid in Newark, and I never spoke a lot about it, never sought fame or fortune.
Right.
And so that's been my journey. I ended up going to MIT, did 4 degrees, started 7 different companies.
Wait, you said that pretty fast. How many degrees?
I have 4 degrees from MIT,
And what are they
my
in?
PhD. So I have my undergraduate in electrical engineering, computer science.
Okay.
I have 2 master's degrees, believe it one or not, in visual studies, where I learned graphic design from one of the grand dames of graphic design, Muriel Cooper, and I have another master's in mechanical engineering, and my PhD is in biological engineering. But I just didn't get all these degrees in one fell swoop. I got those degrees over 30 years. I
Okay.
would go to school. I was always working when I went to MIT. I had a full-time job, then started a company, came back to MIT, would do another degree while doing a full-time job. So I was in and out. So I appreciate a practical engineering education, but I also appreciate that you actually have to build stuff and give jobs to people and have a job. And America affords you the ability to do both.
Folks, we're speaking. We have him in the studio here. He came down to Fairhaven to join us, Dr. Shiva, and he's running for the United States Senate for the seat currently occupied by Liz Warren. What's your website?
It's shivaforsenate.com. SHIVA, and you can just call me Shiva.
Shiva.
Yeah.
So spell it again for the folks at home.
SHIVA for FOR Senate.
Okay.
So
Got-
Shiva for Senate.
Yeah, check that out. This is fantastic. I found your candidacy, I try to follow as much as I can, but there's so much going on right now because I believe Liz Warren is very vulnerable. I really, truly believe that. I was one of the few people to predict Donald Trump would win. I now think that she can be defeated. Of course, a broken clock is also right twice a day, Doctor.
That's
So
true.
who knows? It could just be a fluke. But I've been around this business a while, and I find you impressive. Talk a little bit about your time at MIT. You weren't just doing engineering work. You were also involved in some of the political stuff up there.
Oh yeah, definitely. You see, I've had to fight all my life, Chris. When you grow up in the casteist environment I grew up in India, I had a deep recognition of injustice in the world. When I came to MIT, I saw the hypocrisy of this liberal institution, which claimed it stood for quote unquote liberal values, but it was actually in many ways supporting the opposite of that. So as a kid, even though I was getting my degree at MIT, you'll see me fighting at MIT. In fact, I'll give you some interesting examples. Many of you may have noticed MIT has this thing called the brass rat, the ring. It's like a big reputation thing to get this ring from MIT. I don't frankly have a ring because I don't like all of those elitist models. But
Okay.
The ring committee at MIT, where I was on the freshman body as one of the student counselors. In fact, I became freshman body president. But there was a ring committee. These ring committee members would get a free ring, and they were responsible for choosing the ring vendor. And I thought this was absolutely promoting pay-to-play corruption.
Okay.
And I protested against it. Eventually, I left that group. But, at a young age, they basically were teaching people to be corrupt, frankly. So you'll see me exposing that. MIT, for example, was investing, remember, in racist South Africa.
Yes, I saw this much, and that's what I would like you to talk
Which was
about.
called
Yeah.
apartheid. And what was interesting was, on campus, you would see these, what I call these 3 different trends. Those people who said that's fine, the establishment. And then you had people who said, hey, this is absolutely wrong, and MIT needs to remove it. And then you had other people, what I call the not-so-establishment kids, who said, well, it's they were flip-flopping. So we took a very principled stand. There were sort of the liberals at MIT who would easy for them to talk about segregation and apartheid in South Africa,
Right.
but they would be afraid to go into Dorchester, Roxbury to talk about poor people or South Boston in the United States. So our group, our movement at MIT did something very interesting. We said, look, it's not sufficient we talk about racism and segregation in South Africa. Let's talk about the fact that the food service workers, I believe it was Local 26, that the fact that MIT was mistreating the local food service workers. So we connected both those movements.
Mm-hmm.
So my history has always been looking at not things globally, just for, hey, gee whiz, but it was also about connecting things in a very practical way. So there's actually a picture of me burning the South African flag on the steps of MIT.
I saw
and
it.
we led one of the big protests. But this is what I call liberal hypocrisy. when I graduated from MIT in 2007 with my PhD, I was the only student who took out U.S. A big sign which said U.S. out of Iraq.
Right.
Half the crowd booed me and the other half cheered me on. And I also saw this hypocrisy because here at MIT, during graduation day, when American soldiers are being killed, has Muhammad Yunus talk about microloans when no one's even talking about the fact that the war is raging on and the fact that we sent soldiers there to die for a war. Frankly, I don't think we had to. And so I went to India in 2009 on a Fulbright and was appointed by the Prime Minister of India to run the largest innovation center.
Just for people who don't know, explain what a Fulbright Scholarship is.
A Fulbright Scholarship was set up by Senator William Fulbright, again, one of the great Republican senators. He was the one who actually was the first one to bring up the term military-industrial academic complex. Great guy. It wasn't a Democrat who brought up that term. It was a Republican who talked about the collusion between the military, the industry, and academia, where war was conducted not to protect a country, but for profit, like Hillary Clinton was involved in.
Right.
So Fulbright started a very important scholarship called the Fulbright Scholarship, which was really to enable scholars to go to other countries and learn about other cultures and other cultures to come here. So it's a reasonably prestigious scholarship.
Yeah, no, it is.
To get one.
Yeah.
And so I went to India and I studied the integration between Eastern and Western medicine. My degree's in biological engineering. But while I was in India finishing up my research in 2009, I was recruited by the former Prime Minister's office of India, Manmohan Singh's office, to run the largest innovation center there. Within about 3 months, I figured out they just had me in there just to have the MIT brand there, but they really didn't want to do anything.
Really?
I wrote a paper on the corruption in India. It got released to the press. I was fired within 3 hours, evicted from my home, and under death threats, I had to leave India. So I've always stood up. And more recently, fake news, Gawker Media. Gawker Media, as you know, is this news company. They had written all these defamatory articles when my stuff went into the Smithsonian. Clearly, the facts are black and white. A 14-year-old kid in India invented, not in India, in Newark invented email.
Right.
When that went in, Gawker tried to diminish that. Because you have to understand that innovation can occur anywhere. You don't have to go to MIT to be an innovator.
True.
It occurred in Newark. It occurred in Franklin, Idaho. A 14-year-old boy invented TV. But when the facts came out that I did invent email in 1978, all the liberal media who claimed that they want to help everyone tried to rewrite the narrative. I sued Gawker along with Hulk Hogan. We took them down. They went bankrupt. And I got a big settlement of $750,000. But more importantly, those 3 articles came down. And I didn't do this for the money. I did this because the fact is that there's a lot of smart people in this country, and they're not just at MIT.
Hey, this is really interesting, guys. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back. We have Dr. Shiva in here, and he is running for the United States Senate. And this is fascinating interview. And I do appreciate, I want to say again, a lot of our guests phone it in. But he's shown up, guys, and that's important. He's come down here to Fairhaven today to join us. So we'll take a quick break. We'll be right back. This is Sunday Brunch with Chris McCarthy. And good morning. This is Sunday Brunch. I'm Chris McCarthy, and really delighted to have in the studio a guest this morning, Dr. Shiva, who is running for the U.S. Senate. What's your website again?
It's Shiva for Senate.
Shiva for Senate. Very easy. It's FOR, not the letter 4.
Yeah, or you could go to FOR. Either way, it'll get you there. Shiva for Senate, but we're using Shiva with the number 4Senate.com.
Perfect. Okay. So we're talking now. We gave us your background. It's fascinating. You can check it out. 14 years old, invented electronic mail. 4 degrees from MIT. An actual Indian from the country of India.
A real Indian.
A real Indian. And let's talk a little bit about some of the issues that are going on the national level and here locally. The big thing near and dear to our heart down here in Fairhaven and Greater New Bedford is the fishing industry, because even if you don't work in the fishing industry directly, it brings in billions of dollars to the area, and so it's an economic multiplier. You are a scientist. Talk to us a little bit about your opinions on the fishing industry and what's going on with the federal government and what you would do as a U.S. Senator. Yes.
So first of all, we have to look at it from this deeper issue of how decisions get made. So let me step back and look at biologically. Okay, I'm a biological engineer. I have, as I mentioned, a number of degrees. But if you just take it really simple, the human body has about 10 trillion cells. Think about that. The intelligence is not in one centralized area. There's no federal government in the human body. There's no centralization of power. Right. In fact, nature recognizes that power comes at the edges, that we distribute power and intelligence to at the individual level. That's why we have 10 trillion cells. We're not one big massive cell.
That's a very interesting point, yeah.
Right, so nature knows that intelligence is at the edges. What's happened is people like Elizabeth Warren, it's not even a left or right issue. What's happened is you have basically a bunch of people who don't really think about things anymore, and they do this because they want to consolidate power, so they can control others. So once you understand this, you can start looking at things in many interesting ways. So when you look at the regulation of the fishing industry, it actually did better before it was regulated. The reality is the fisherman who's at the docks knows exactly what's going on. He knows how much to fish. They assume that people at the individual level are greedy. They want to rape the oceans. This is all the assumption that they're stupid.
The government's assumption.
The reality is none of those people probably have ever fished in their lives. They probably don't have ever fixed anything in their lives. They probably never built anything in their lives. So you have a bunch of frankly stupid people who have what I call intellectual idiots, who have somehow gone through the system and gotten their degrees, but never ever having to do anything.
Right.
So think about a lawyer, right? Think about how that process goes. You go, and by the way, there's a lot of good lawyers out there.
Of course.
Okay? But the model is, if you want to get into politics, the standard model is you go get your bachelor's degree, you go maybe work somewhere for 2 years, then you go to law school, and while you're at law school, if you're preparing for your career politics, you're planning that out. And then you go get some academic position. Obama is a case in point. And then you go run for politics. It's a career model, and they're planning out every step. But by the time they get into a federal government position, have they ever started a business? Have they ever built anything? Nothing. So have they ever fished? So many of these people know really nothing about science or fishing, and they assume that fishermen don't know what they're doing, that they have to be regulated. And this whole pattern is this concept of centralized command and control. And that's where they like to control things, because they can control their money, their consultants, the lobbyists, etc.
Right.
And nature doesn't work that way. So if you actually look at a number of the data that's come about whether things are being overfished or underfished, right? The reality is there's always contradictory data, right?
Certainly. We see that all the time.
Exactly. So what they do is, instead of trusting the local people, what they know, they get consultants and they get supposed experts who try to regulate this whole process. So we have to really look at that whole methodology of how they do this regulatory process, that it's not coming bottoms up from people, it's coming top down.
You know, I once heard from he was a Democrat, but an elected official, conservative business guy, actually a guy who did things. And he said to me, the only thing that stands between regular people and the bureaucrats are actually elected officials. That if you don't have strong elected officials, the bureaucrats will run right over people. You don't strike me, sir, as I sit here, as a guy who's going to be pushed around by the bureaucracy.
No, because I've actually fought the bureaucracy. If you go to the website, Shiva for Senate, you'll see, there's 3 things which I think are real, exhibit who I am. And this is not any hype. I'm a real fighter. I've fought all my life. While I was in my own home institutions. I mean, people should start considering all the nonsense that goes within Liz Warren's backyard at Harvard. Has she ever stood up there? But she protects her position. I've been a real innovator, which means I create things. Beyond the invention of email, I've always invented many, many other things. And I'm an all-American Indian at the core of it. It's not I just grew up in India, but I had a paper route, played Little League. I'm an American kid at the end of the day, and grown up in America. So the fundamental notion of this country was based on believing people's ability to create and their innovative spirit. And that's what we need to get back to. This whole notion of the elites, be it in Hollywood or on the East Coast, thinking that they know everything, is destroying this country. And my opinion is that Donald Trump's win was a necessary disruption, and these elites are fundamentally not upset at him. They're upset at the fact that they lost control. That's what really happened.
Doctor, talk to us. You are an actual immigrant to this country, came here at the age of 7, 1963, with your parents, fleeing the caste system of India, which is, if people don't realize, really check that out for a little bit. That's quite an accomplishment, almost impossible, truthfully.
Definitely.
On behalf of your parents. Talk to us about the immigration system and what's going on now, and people. Well, tell us your opinion of the immigration system.
Yes. So I have a very different perspective on this. If you sort of turn the clock back to 1970 when we came here, India since 1947 had a so-called independence. But I would argue India never really got independent. The British left, white men with crowns left, and brown men with white hats took over. And what you had was India never had a revolution, really, which would have been good for India. India had, in fact, if you read the documents, what's called transfer of power. The British, frankly, if you probe deeper, had decided to leave India. They created a subsidiary, and they basically functionalized control of India by appointing these lackey Indians.
Okay.
Lackeys meaning people who basically would support the British colonialist system. Right. That's what really occurred in India. So India, over 70 years, had this whole layer of corruption throughout India. And part of that was the using the caste system to keep people in line. So the fact my parents came here was pretty interesting. But Modi, who's a recent guy who I'd call sort of the Trump of India, his election broke this old model of the dynasty. So if you look at India, it went from Nehru to Indira Gandhi to her son, and then, et cetera, right?
Right.
So it's been a dynastic government. So it's been corrupt. Like many countries, throughout the world, many of these developing nations have deep corruption in there. So when America in 1970 enabled people like my parents to come here, educated people, they did it because America at that time was not producing enough scientists and engineers.
Okay.
Right? So in some ways, you can argue, yes, my parents were very fortunate to come here, but I would argue that we took a shortcut. In many ways, why didn't we, as Americans, put more effort into building our own resilience, our own educational system here? So yes, my parents came here, but I would argue that the brain drain took place in India. The smartest people left India. Had, let's say, for example, you wind the clock back, that had not been allowed.
Okay.
Probably people like my parents would have stayed in India, probably overthrown the corruption in India. So I would argue that when we let immigration occur at a point to avoid the real issues of this country, we're actually creating global insecurity. Because it would have been better probably people like my parents stayed in India, used their intellectual mind to overcome the corruption in India, and had better governance there. So you had the brain drain take place. Similar to if you look at the H-1B,
Just tell people quickly what that is if they don't know.
So the H-1B is a business visa which lets companies bring Indian workers here. They can come initially on a business visa, then they can go on an H-1B. So
they can come from anywhere in the country.
They can come from anywhere in the country, not only India, anywhere on the planet.
Right.
People can come to the U.S. But again, the reason the H-1B came in was because we weren't producing, frankly, enough engineers and scientists and technologists in this country. So it was an easy way, without addressing that issue, we said, okay, let's bring in people from other countries. And what that did was it promoted the and I've seen it, I witnessed it even at places like MIT and other institutions, that you don't really develop the technological base of this country. It's a shortcut. So you have this phenomenon taking place that you have kids staying with their parents right now. You have jobs not being found for kids here. And the indigenous local talent of America has, in many ways, doesn't develop. So that's what's really going on. So I have a different perspective on this. In some ways, this is almost people saying, well, why did you come here? Well, I would argue that it was, I couldn't make a decision when I was 7 years old.
Correct.
So I was, in some ways, a part of that decision-making my parents did. So there's an important point here that's being made. We have 11 million illegal immigrants here. My parents, on the other hand, came here legally.
Right.
And
massive distinction.
Massive distinction. There's a big distinction between legal immigration and illegal immigration. My dad came here first. He had to get a job. He had to show that he could work, etc. We came here about a year later. So we didn't see my dad for close to a year. So, because it was a fortune to come to this country.
Right.
If you look at the immigration issue here, particularly if you look at the, Mexican Americans, the way we dealt with Mexican Americans after we sort of took over their lands in many ways, we never really gave them citizenship. It was always kept in this nebulous stage.
Right.
And this was done so we could always keep them afraid, so we could always get cheap labor out of them.
Right, because it's designed to keep wage prices low for business.
Exactly. Well, not only wage prices low, but it was actually designed to create a voting bloc. And the liberal voting.
Yes.
So if you really look at it, it's in many ways, it was a form of corruption and a form of real conspiracy to really have 11 million illegal immigrants here. Many of them do vote Democratic. And many of them, if you notice, the 14th Amendment says that you have to be a person, and a person is considered anyone who pays taxes, not a citizen. So when people do the allocation of representatives, it's based on the 14th Amendment, which allows people, the illegal immigrants, to be counted in that, so they actually get representation. And so fundamentally what this is doing is this is the old model, like in India, for example, many of these politicians before they run, the day before they'll give rice, they'll give free TVs, free laptops. It's a way of buying votes.
They give free laptops in India?
Yeah,
oh,
free
I
laptops.
might move there. Actually,
Exactly.
that's not a bad deal.
Right, but what I'm saying is a way of pandering.
Yeah, and
right?
corruption.
It's a way of corruption. And if you look at nearly most of the policies of those who support the quote unquote liberal politics or Elizabeth Warren, it's basically someone who's absolutely either ignorant about what really makes things work, or is basically about herself and about pandering to become the next president. And by the way, she doesn't care about Massachusetts. She's already preparing for her presidential election, and she should be ashamed of herself.
Not one bit at all.
Yeah,
it's not. And I think she's the only one that doesn't realize it. It's so transparent, so absolutely. If we re-elect her, that's it. We're definitely not going to have any representation because she's simply going to be running for president. We are speaking with Dr. Shiva, who is running for U.S. Senate for the seat currently occupied by Liz Warren in the Republican primary. I think it's going to be a fascinating primary because you have some other decent people who are looking at running for the race. Who's supporting you? Any big names?
Well, Kurt Schilling, as you know, came out and supported me.
And Kurt Schilling is the former Red Sox
baseball player,
and who was looking at the race himself.
Yeah. Kurt's very well known. He's a great baseball player, and Kurt's actually extremely bright. He reads a lot of history and politics. He understands what's going on. He understands that Elizabeth Warren wants to rig the system. He also has a deep understanding of the fact that we need systems on left and right that are based on meritocracy. It's fascinating. We just got essentially an endorsement from the Lowell Sun, local newspaper.
Oh, great.
What I find interesting is that overnight, how some people can get in the Boston Globe and the Boston Herald and Channel 7 News, like one of our guys who's said he's going to explore running against Liz Warren. And I find that, frankly, another form of corruption. The fact that insiders, even within the Republican Party, can make a few phone calls and they get on major mass media, I think that's actually inappropriate. And I think that, too, also should be condemned, and it's a different form of corruption. Because mainstream media, if you look at mainstream media and you look at establishment, the politicos, they actually want to control who, in fact, the opposition is.
Yes.
Right? So I find this that, this should also be countered. In many ways, my running is a very different kind of run because I'm a scientist, I'm an entrepreneur, I've had to run businesses. I don't need to do this, right? I don't need my next political job. I'm doing this because I think we need a 21st century senator. Because fundamentally, if you look at Massachusetts, you need to understand science. You need to understand engineering. You need to understand what's going on with working people. You need someone who's actually done stuff.
And that's to understand our economy, right?
Exactly. You can't, even Einstein said something fascinating. He said that when you get away from the actual work, farther and farther away from doing the actual work, you lose greater and greater understanding of what's really going on. I have no idea why we give politicians and celebrities so much, even any level of this much recognition.
Or credit.
Right. Because what are they actually doing? They are basically in there within a system to keep getting elected. And I think we're at a point in human history now. Massachusetts, think about it, this is where the American Revolution was ignited.
Right.
The founding fathers who started the American Revolution weren't politicians. They were actually architects, inventors, scientists, engineers, people who made stuff, manufacturers.
Sure, they put the patent system in place as part of the Constitution, which shows really who they were.
Exactly. And it's a very interesting point you make here. So if you don't understand how goods and services are made and delivered, you don't even understand how to craft legal policy. Getting back to the email thing was fascinating. It was in 1978 when I invented email.
At the age of
14, there was no mechanisms to protect software. The policymakers in Washington thought software was sheet music.
Really?
Okay, so it's only in 1980 did they allow you to use a Copyright Act of 1976, which they amended to become the Software Act of 1980, so through copyright. And I did copyright my software legally to recognize the inventor of email. But it was only 15 years later when the Federal Court of Appeals recognized that software was really a digital machine. And then you could patent it. So the point is, in the 21st century, we need people who actually are everyday people who create make things, deliver goods and services in Congress. We really need to get rid of these people who think they can go from being a lawyer to being an academic and then going and running for office. That whole process needs to be completely broken.
We're talking to Dr. Shiva, who's running for U.S. Senate. I will point this out to you, then we're going to take a quick break. Massachusetts was the only state that forbid the sale of Apple stock because at the time the Secretary of State, Conley, believed that that was a scam, that it wasn't going to be going anywhere. Can you imagine that? You couldn't have bought Apple stock.
I wonder what her background is.
A politician, a lawyer.
Right.
You get it. We'll be right back, folks.
That's my point, yeah.
1420 WBSM. Living in New England.
Here is the bringing it up. I didn't have the microphones on. See, I'm new here, too, Dr. Shiva. So let me just recast that. We have Dr. Shiva here in the studio with us, who's running for the U.S. Senate as a Republican. He's driven down from his home in Belmont, which is quite a ride, folks, to come to Fairhaven. I do appreciate that he put the effort in to come down here, to be in studio with us. You can see this presentation online. It'll be on our YouTube channel as well at WBSM. But Dr. Shiva, when you came down here, I like to ask people about how they feel about infrastructure, specifically for us, the Fairhaven New Bedford Bridge, which has been around for a long, long time, and it really is in desperate need of repair. Is that something that you would advocate on behalf of us here as a U.S. Senator?
Oh, definitely. I definitely think that's something that the federal government should immediately help build. I mean, it's a beautiful area down here when we came down on the drive. By the way, I thank you for having me here. For me, I really enjoy meeting people, and I don't think this would have been appropriate to do it over the phone. I know it was in the morning coming down, but I appreciate you hosting us. But the drive down here...
And not only that, I moved the time up an hour on him at about midnight, right? Because I realized the Red Sox were coming on, and we were going to be interrupted.
Yeah, they're more important, by the way.
Yeah, well, I have no control. But they were... So I actually, not only did he come down here, I actually moved the time up by an hour on him at the last minute. So, folks, he's got the commitment there and the dedication to it. But go ahead.
Yeah, so I think it's very important. Many years ago, one of the research projects I worked on at MIT was looking at how to predict bridge deck deterioration. So, and at that time, this was in the late 80s, we knew that many of the bridges in this country were going to start falling apart, and that the government would have to figure out ways to solve those bridge problems ahead of time. So it turns out that you can't. So if you have a bridge, you don't really know what's going on inside that bridge, unless if you start hammering and opening it up.
Oh, and you can't.
And you can't do that because that's going to hurt the bridge. So we were working on a technology which was funded by the NSF, National Science Foundation, where you send radio waves down, and based on the radio waves bouncing back, you could actually look at the changes in those radio waves to figure out, was it salt erosion? Was it different types of erosion? And this is good research that we should be funding, because we could have done in many ways, like you get an MRI done. That's what we were doing for a bridge.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah, so those kinds of things, I think we do need federal support to fund. And the bridges and the infrastructure of this country, they're not only Massachusetts infrastructure, right? They're part of the highway system.
That's right.
And that really supports the entire nation. And if you go back to the history of this country, it was in the 30s and 40s, and we really started, in particular in the 50s with Eisenhower, we really started building out the highway infrastructure. It's what really exploded the economic growth of this country. So the bridge in Fairhaven should definitely be supported, because it's a very important part of our state here.
Well, I think we all appreciate that here in the greater New Bedford area, your support for that, because quite frankly, we're just frustrated with Liz Warren's lack of attention to the area. Now, one of the big debates in Washington is healthcare policy, and Obamacare, now it's Trump care. There's all kinds of things floating out there. But you had an interesting perspective. We talked off the air about prevention. Talk to us a little bit about your thoughts.
Yeah, so if you look at, again, just getting back to the bridge issue, the fact that Liz Warren is paying attention to this, again, not paying attention to this is, again, someone who does not understand what infrastructure really means. She probably gets everything taken care of at Harvard, doesn't really have to wonder where anything comes from. But if you're working people and you're an innovator and you're an entrepreneur, you're obviously concerned where things come from.
And you also drove yourself down here. I watched you get out of the car.
Yeah, I did. I drove myself down.
Yeah.
Yeah. But, so when you look at healthcare, when you look at, be it Obama or even the Ryan care, which was basically a form of Obamacare in it was a wolf in sheep's clothing in many ways, these guys don't really ever discuss the health in healthcare. What is healthcare? For me, one aspect of healthcare is that our fundamental aspect comes back to our slogan for our whole campaign, Be the Light, which means we as individuals need to be accountable for ourselves. So I believe you should pay something for healthcare. Why? Because when you pay something, you'll question your doctor, where the money's going, how much he's spending, all these things. Today, we don't know what happens in the back room. The doctors are very easy to start doing tests and invasive procedures that are unnecessary because it generates revenue for them.
Right.
And the other piece...
And also the defensive medicine too, right?
It's a defense, yeah. So I've studied this a lot. You know, I grew up in India where my grandmother was a village healer practicing India's traditional system of medicine. We in the Western world might call it woo-woo medicine, but it really... Much of that stuff dates back 5,000 years, and it was based on looking at a person as an individual, understanding what was going on inside them. So my grandmother could observe your face, predict what was going on inside your body based on different organs, and then she would make you particular formulations. And I saw her heal hundreds and hundreds of people as a kid.
Really?
Yeah. So today we call this alternative medicine.
Right.
People call it yoga, right? It comes in various forms. But by the way, there's 36 million yoga practitioners now in the United States. It's clear that when you do exercise, you watch what you put in your body, minor changes, you know, stop eating foods with pesticides in them, it definitely does affect your body in a positive way.
I just threw that Burger King cup away, yeah. Dr. Shiva.
But, you know,
but I agree
by the way,
with you.
Burger King is an interesting organization. You know, they're very well organized, same with McDonald's. You know, these are great American businesses. If they could make a small couple of degree adjustments, their businesses could explosively grow. I'll come back to that. But yeah. the point is that... preventative health, which is, so if you look at the modern healthcare system, getting back to that, and you trace it back, it actually came from wartime medicine. Florence Nightingale, everyone thinks she was a nurse, was actually a member of the Royal Society of Statistics. She was the first woman who did big data visualization. She was an amazing woman. She saw in the Crimean War in the 1800s, soldiers were not dying from getting shot on the battlefield, but when they came into the hospital, the healthcare was horrible. In the 18th, you went to the hospitals to die.
Right.
She's the one,
and things.
infections, etc. She's the one who created the whole notion of healthcare. Let's get the hospitals clean. Let's put in hygiene. Let's clean the floors. She had this vision of 21st century medicine where doctors would do clinical research. But you have to understand, the notion of that was to put a soldier back on the battlefield. Crisis medicine. So we created antibiotics, we created steroids, we created all these great surgeries. But the modern healthcare system is based on wartime healthcare. So after you get screwed up, after you get cancer, after something happens, then we come in. And I'm not saying those interventions are bad. God forbid something happens in an accident.
Of course.
You need that kind of care. But there's a whole nother type of medicine which is based on prevention, which is based on, you know, non-invasive approaches, you know, minor things that you can do for your body. And no one discusses this per se. It's all about how you're going to fund this pharmaceutical model of in a large drug price medicine. And I know these intimately. You know, I have a company we just started that's going to eliminate animal testing so you can create medicines faster and cheaper.
Interesting.
So for me, healthcare, you can solve many, many problems by proper nutrition. You know, we don't even teach MDs proper nutrition. You go to a place like MIT and Harvard, the kids' cafeteria isn't that great. College students' cafeteria isn't even that good. So we don't even teach people health care, how to care for themselves.
And that translates ultimately into less money being spent on healthcare and a more productive lifestyle and a happier lifestyle.
More happier lifestyle. And you're basically, again, putting stuff back into the individual. Let individuals start taking care of themselves, right? And you're giving people tools to make choices the right way. We today do factory farming of our food.
Right.
There's a paper that just came out saying Roundup, everyone know what Roundup, it's the stuff you use for weed killer. It's used on factory farms. They found ultra-low levels of Roundup, what's also known as glyphosate, causes fatty liver, which is a source of many of diabetes, etc. So when you start looking at this, and by the way, Hillary Clinton was funded by Monsanto, right? She got $12 million from agrobiotech. I think Trump got about $200K.
Right.
So the liberals who are listening to this show, people who the yoga people listening to this show, you should really recognize that I'm probably the only guy who's running for Senate, probably across the country, who actually understands health, who's been educated in Eastern and Western medicine.
This is fascinating. We're talking with Dr. Shiva, who's running for U.S. Senate. What's your website if people are interested?
ShivaForSenate.com. It's very easy. Shiva, S-H-I-V-A, for Senate.com.
Yeah, I didn't know how interesting this conversation was going to be when I invited you down. Talk to us a little bit about foreign policy. What are your thoughts on this, recognizing as a United States Senator you'll be involved in that?
Yeah, so it goes back to core philosophy, right? I believe that a great country like the United States needs to have we need to protect our borders. We need to have a strong military to protect ourselves. Elizabeth Warren has basically taken that away. Her positions have been against that. But we need to have a strong military. The other thing we need to have as a part of that, foreign policy, charity begins at home in many ways. I'm in many ways in favor of, after someone graduates high school, having some form of public service. I'm not saying conscription per se, but there should be some form of public service where people understand that it is, as I said before, a birth lottery to be born in this country, and that they develop some sense of progressive nationalism. I'm not talking about cultural nationalism. I'm talking about a progressive nationalism where people recognize that it's an extremely important part of being part of the American fabric, and people contribute in some way. So they value these people who do actually go fight for us. So I think foreign policy in many ways begins with that notion.
Thank you. We'll be right back.
McCarthy.
And good afternoon. This is still Sunday Brunch, and we'll be here for about another 25 minutes until the Red Sox get started here. So another great game. So we're cut a little short, but because we're cut a little short, we got Dr. Shiva to stick around for another 25 minutes or so, and I really do appreciate that. He's in studio, folks, which is a nice thing to do because he drove down from Belmont, Massachusetts today, but he got to see this great area. I'm sure he's been here before anyway. Dr. Shiva is running for the United States Senate as a Republican. Could be a crowded field. We don't know yet. But you're in, right?
I'm definitely in.
You're in.
I think I was one of the first ones in, if not the first.
And Kurt Schilling, who looked at running, is now supporting you.
Definitely.
I find that very interesting, the Red Sox champion pitcher. What's your website if people want to learn more about you?
The website is shivaforsenate.com, SHIVA, the number 4senate.com, Shiva for Senate.
For those people who are just tuning in with us, waiting for the Red Sox, we're the pregame. Although you played baseball, right, as a kid?
I did, yeah. Right. I love baseball.
Not just a nerd, also an athlete, as you stated. Tell people, again, a little bit about you. You immigrated to this country at the age of?
7. I literally left India on my 7th birthday. And then we landed in, New York. I grew up in the New Jersey area. Grew up as an all-American kid, And
talk about this. This is fascinating, and what got me kind of interested in you. What did you invent at the age of 14?
I invented email as we know it today. In those days when I was working at the small medical school, most people over the age of 40 remember this thing called the inter-office mail system. Every secretary had an inbox, outbox folder. She'd write this thing called a memo, carbon copy on paper. It was a whole system for collaboration. Mm-hmm. I was asked to convert that whole system to the electronic version, 50,000 lines of code. I called it email. In fact, ended up getting the first U.S. copyright for it. So I invented the first email system.
Fantastic. And we're doing a quick one here for those people who already heard it, but I want people to understand. And you went to MIT, one of the most prestigious schools in the country, and you have how many degrees?
I have 4 degrees from MIT in the fields of electrical engineering, computer science, in fact, a degree in the art and visual studies, mechanical engineering. My PhD's in biological engineering.
And what I find very interesting is that, as I said earlier, the only thing that stands between the individual and the bureaucrats that are our government are strong, informed elected officials. And someone told me that years ago who was a state senator, and I have always lived with that ever since because I found it to be 100% true. And sitting here looking at you and talking with you, you don't strike me as a man who can be hoodwinked. You don't strike me as a person who can be pushed around. You strike me as a fighter and someone who will stand up for the individual against the bureaucracy. Definitely.
That's what my whole life has been about, Chris. It's always been fighting for the individual. And our campaign slogan is "Be the Light and Fight for the American Dream." So it has some spiritual aspects in there, which is basically we believe in the individual and the fact that human beings are quite resilient, and human beings are supposed to be tested. We're supposed to work hard. I mean, from a Republican standpoint, Lincoln said labor was more important than capital, that we were supposed to work hard. And when we work hard, we actually exercise who we are and the light comes through. If we don't exercise who we are and we don't fully engage ourselves, we basically cheat ourselves of life.
One question I ask everyone down here, because it's near and dear to my heart, but I think it's near and dear to America, is how do you feel about the Second Amendment and the right to bear arms?
I think the Second Amendment is probably one of the most important amendments in the entire U.S. Constitution. Fundamentally, the Founding Fathers put it in there so we as citizens could protect ourselves from our own government. And I think anyone who doesn't understand that and diminishes that by saying, oh, people are going to have guns and go kill everyone, it's absolutely not true. In fact, most people want to have good, peaceful families. They want to take care of themselves. In fact, everyone, I think, should be trained in the use of weapons at a young age and how to protect themselves. Obviously, we need to temper that with making sure that you give guns and license to the right people. But the entire, one of the foundations of our Constitution was a Second Amendment, so we'd have a very vibrant and accountable democracy.
Yeah, and I appreciate you understanding that and having the intellectual capacity to articulate that.
It's really not me. It's the founding fathers.
Well,
these guys were 100 times more smarter than I could ever think about being.
Isn't it easier, right? Isn't it easier if you just pay attention to what they wrote? It makes it a lot easier. Now, I find this, we're focused here on jobs and the economy. You have a very unique educational background and a list of experiences in doing things that can help as you craft legislation or prevent legislation in Washington. Talk about the Massachusetts economy and what you think you can bring to it in terms of a legislator.
Yeah, I think the number one thing is, look, what creates jobs is innovation and incenting people to actually work hard, actually have a job and work. Those are the two foundations. If you look at MIT, I think MIT graduated about 100,000 graduates who created close to $2 trillion per year in annual for the economy. Mm-hmm. So it's clear that you train people to actually use their hands, use their minds, and actually create things. That's what generates capital.
Right.
It's not like you make capital by moving money around. So that's probably the most important thing. So we need to drive innovation, but that innovation cannot just be in Kendall Square at MIT. Innovation is frankly like a weed. You can't factory farm it. It should grow everywhere.
Organically.
It's organic. Right. Yeah. So in many ways, innovation should be organic. It should be non-GMO. Right. What we are doing is we put policies in place where we say innovation can only occur in a few mile radius in Silicon Valley, and all the elites think they're so smart. They're the ones who innovate. But the reality is innovation occurs anywhere. Email got invented in Newark, New Jersey. TV got invented by a 14-year-old kid in Franklin, Idaho. And there's a lot of smart people in this state and in this country. So we need to drive innovation everywhere, not just centralize it.
The other thing you said is about practical experience. Yeah. That so many people don't have any practical experience, and that you do.
In the public sector. In the public sector, yeah. So it's career politicians, career academics who exist for basically getting votes. And when you exist for getting votes, you're going to do whatever it takes to get votes. You're not going to do what's right. My entire life has always been doing what's right. Because if you do what's right, I believe the money will follow. In the Indian system of what we call these gods and goddesses, there's a goddess called Saraswati, who's a goddess of knowledge, and there's a goddess called Lakshmi, who's a goddess of wealth. And it goes that the goddess of wealth is very jealous of the goddess of knowledge. Right. So if you want to create wealth, you support knowledge, which means innovation, and the wealth will follow. It's not like you go after wealth.
That's very interesting. Here's the other thing that strikes me is I think if your lawnmower breaks, you can probably fix it, right?
Yeah, I think that's what we need. I mean, for example, vocational technical skills, those jobs, all those things should be supported. Engineering skills, basic skills type jobs. It's very hard, most people know, to even get a good electrician these days. It's hard to even get someone to mow your lawn properly. And there's an incredible need for lots and lots of jobs that we need to support. So yeah, I can fix my lawnmower, I can fix a lot of things. And I wonder how many things politicians in the U.S. Senate or representatives can actually fix. Meanwhile, they're trying to say they can fix things in governance.
Yeah, no, I mean, but we get a lot of people listening to this audience who, if their lawnmower breaks, they can fix it, and they're kind of looking for someone who can do that stuff because it's practical knowledge. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back. And this is Sunday Brunch. We're getting ready to finish up here. The Red Sox are going to get started, but we do have Dr. Shiva here in the studio with us from Belmont, Massachusetts, who drove down here to be with us in the studio, and we appreciate that. You can watch this interview on YouTube. We'll have it out at the WBSM channel later, probably tomorrow, maybe later today. But your website, again, for folks who are listening and want to learn more about you or maybe want to help you out.
The website is shivaforsenate.com, SHIVA, number 4, senate.com. In fact, next weekend, next Saturday, starting at 10 a.m. in Cambridge at 701 Concord Avenue, we'll be painting our bus. We've had a couple of students at MIT who've actually refurbished a school bus from scratch. That'll be like our quote-unquote Air Force One as we travel around Massachusetts and go right to people to hear what they want.
And it's a school bus.
It's a school bus.
Yeah, it's not one of these big things that you can sleep on. It's a regular school bus. And probably if it broke down, you could fix it.
We could fix it.
Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So we these students, I think they bought it for less than $1,000 several years ago. 2 students, one at MIT, one from Simmons, a woman, and they just wanted to do something. They've donated it to our campaign, and they refurbished the whole thing.
What I find interesting about your candidacy, well, there's a million things, but one thing, we talked about this off the air, the Democrat playbook is to brand people racist, xenophobes, and that playbook won't work with you.
Yeah, I think it's a playbook that basically it's a playbook, as you say, that they use where they take keywords and they cobble together. In fact, I wrote an article against Liz Warren's attack on Neil Gorsuch. And if you read the Globe article, it was just like she cut and pasted some keywords, cobbled it together. And in fact, many years ago, we had another company we created called Echo Mail, which would automatically read email and can figure out what the content was. I did it for the Clinton White House. We grew that to around a $250 million valued company. And in my op-ed piece, I basically said, if we could have, a computer program could have written her op-ed piece, because it was just looking for keywords, cobbling together words. It's all rhetoric. And I think people are getting smart, though, Chris. I think people are recognizing that the rhetoric is not going to fly anymore. We need people who actually look at problems like fix a lawnmower, actually look at things, and actually understand what's really going on. It's beyond left or right, liberal or conservative. It's actually solving people's problems in a very practical way.
Yeah, and the fact that you immigrated to this country at the age of 7 and your family was fleeing oppression and the caste system in India, which, folks, we don't have time to get into all of it, but really look that up because it's pretty brutal type of situation.
Yeah, and what's happened is my parents left the caste system of India, and people like Liz Warren and others want to create a neo-caste system in the United States. In India, you had the priesthood, which is basically the quote-unquote educated people, and today we have the academic elites who think they know it all, and government bureaucrats who think they know it all, that everyone else is stupid. And, I came from a family where my grandparents were poor farmers. My parents worked hard, and growing up in New Jersey, I had public school teachers who worked 2-3 jobs. And everyday people, frankly, know better than these guys in Washington. And it's time everyday people participate in politics. Hey, and we get rid of these politicians.
This has been fascinating. We're going to go to a break. Thank you so much. I'm going to let you folks head back to Belmont. Take a drive around before you leave.
Chris.
We'll have you back.
Yeah,
Again,
it's great to be here.
Shiva for Senate.
Good. Thank you very much.
Great. So much.
ShivaForSenate.com.
Thank you so much.